Picture this, you're standing at the altar, heart pounding, ready for the most important moment of your life. But instead of celebrating your love, your own family has orchestrated a plan to let your sister walk down the aisle first, at your wedding, in a wedding dress. They thought they had me cornered. They thought I'd just accept it like I always did. But what they didn't know was that my husband and I had been planning our own little surprise. And by the end of this story, they paid for every dollar of our dream wedding while getting absolutely nothing in return. If you've ever dealt with toxic family members who think they can walk all over you, you're going to love this story. Hit that subscribe button because we're diving into one of the most satisfying acts of strategic revenge I've ever heard. Like this video if you believe that sometimes, people get exactly what they deserve. And stick around, because this tale of family betrayal and perfect payback is going to leave you speechless. To understand how my family could even conceive of such an outrageous plan, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because this isn't just a story about a wedding day gone wrong, it's about a lifetime of systematic favoritism, manipulation, and emotional abuse that finally met its match. For as long as I can remember, I lived in my sister's shadow. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean that my parents literally structured our entire household around her needs, her wants, and her feelings, while treating me like an inconvenient afterthought. The signs were there from the very beginning. My birthday cakes had to be flavors my sister liked, not me. When I pointed out that I hated chocolate cake, my parents would genuinely act confused, claiming they had no idea. Meanwhile, her birthday cake was always exactly what she wanted, and heaven help anyone who suggested otherwise. Christmas and gift-giving followed the same pattern. My sister consistently received more presents, more expensive items, and more thought put into her gifts. When I was brave enough to point this out as a child, I was lectured about being ungrateful and materialistic. But when she complained about anything, even the smallest thing, it was immediately rectified. But the real damage wasn't in the material things, it was in the complete erosion of trust and fairness that colored every interaction in our household. If my sister accused me of breaking something, taking something, or doing something wrong, my parents believed her instantly. No questions asked. No investigation required. I would be punished immediately, often before I even had a chance to defend myself. On the flip side, when I tried to report my sister's behavior, and believe me, she was not innocent, my parents would dismiss my concerns entirely. They'd say I was being dramatic, jealous, or trying to get my sister in trouble. Even when there was undeniable evidence of her wrongdoing, somehow the punishment would be lighter for her, and they'd find a way to make part of it my fault too. I remember one particularly painful incident when I was about 12. My sister had deliberately broken a ceramic figurine that belonged to our grandmother, a piece that meant a lot to me because Grandma had promised it would be mine someday. I saw her throw it against the wall during one of her tantrums. When my parents found the broken pieces, she immediately claimed I had been playing with it and dropped it. Despite the fact that the figurine was shattered in a way that clearly indicated force, not a simple drop, despite the fact that I was crying and begging them to believe me, they sided with her. I was grounded for 2 weeks and forced to write an apology letter to my grandmother. My sister? She got to comfort me during my punishment, playing the role of the sympathetic older sister while secretly smirking at her victory. As we moved into our teenage years, the dynamic only got worse. This was when I started to notice that my sister had a serious social problem. She had no friends. I'm not being cruel here, I'm stating a fact that became impossible to ignore. We attended the same high school, and I watched as she went from having a small group of acquaintances to eating lunch alone every day. Now, I never found out exactly what happened. My parents only ever bragged about her achievements and never acknowledged any problems she might be having. But given her personality and how she treated me at home, I can make some educated guesses about why her peers might have distanced themselves from her. What I do know is that around this time, she seemed to realize that I had something she didn't, genuine friendships. I was reasonably popular, had a solid group of friends who actually enjoyed spending time with me, and was generally well liked by my classmates. This observation seemed to flip a switch in her brain. Suddenly, I went from being an occasional target to being her primary enemy. She began a systematic campaign to isolate me from my friends and destroy any happiness I managed to find outside our toxic household. She would accuse my friends of stealing things when they came over. She'd tell elaborate lies to my parents about my friends' behavior, their influence on me, and their character in general. My parents, true to form, believed every word. I was forbidden from having friends over anymore. My curfews became ridiculously strict. I was told that I couldn't hang out with people after school because, according to my sister, they were bad influences. The reasons varied, but the result was always the same: increased isolation and control. The only thing that saved me from complete social exile was our extended family. Most of our relatives lived in the same town, and I had always gotten along well with my cousins. During one family gathering, when I was probably 14, my cousins invited me to some event. I honestly can't remember what it was anymore, but it sounded fun. I sadly replied that I wasn't allowed to go anywhere anymore. When they asked why, my young, unfiltered self replied matter-of-factly that I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. The silence that followed was deafening. I didn't realize it at the time, but several adults had overheard this exchange. Later that evening, I could hear raised voices from the kitchen where my parents were talking with my aunts and uncles. I couldn't make out the exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. My parents were being confronted about their treatment of me. When we got home that night, I was in massive trouble. I was accused of lying, of trying to make my parents look bad, of being jealous of my sister. I was grounded for a month, not that it mattered much since I wasn't allowed to go anywhere anyway. But something had shifted. While my parents were furious with me privately, they couldn't completely ignore the fact that other family members were now aware of the situation. Shortly after this incident, my sister transferred to a different high school. The official reason given was that it offered better programs, but I knew better. The humiliation of having extended family know about her social struggles was too much for her to bear, and my parents, as always, accommodated her needs immediately. Never mind that this new school was significantly farther away and cost them more money in gas and time. If it made my sister happy, it was worth it. And she did make friends at the new school, which I suppose proved that a fresh start was all she needed. But here's the thing, she never went back to the old dynamic of mostly ignoring me. It was as if she had tasted the power of making my life miserable and found it addictive. The control she could exert over my social life, my relationships with my parents, my general happiness, she wasn't willing to give that up. My home life continued to be a nightmare. Her new friends would come over regularly, and they seemed to take sadistic pleasure in joining her in tormenting me. They would make cruel comments about my appearance, my personality, my interests. When I complained to my parents, they would brush it off as light teasing or just girls being girls. Meanwhile, I had essentially given up on having friends over. Between my parents' hostile treatment of my friends and my sister's false accusations and sabotage attempts, it wasn't worth the drama and potential fallout. Then I got my first boyfriend. I was probably 16, and he was a sweet, genuine guy from my chemistry class. I absolutely did not want to bring him home, but my parents insisted on meeting him. They framed it as being protective parents, but I knew it was really about asserting control and finding reasons to disapprove of my choices. The meeting was a disaster, but not in the way I expected. About halfway through the evening, my boyfriend asked to speak with me privately. He looked uncomfortable and confused as he told me what had happened when we were separated. According to him, my sister had approached him wearing inappropriately revealing clothing and had started batting her eyelashes and flirting aggressively. But it wasn't just the flirting that made him uncomfortable, she had also launched into a detailed character assassination of me, telling him how terrible I was as a sister and as a girlfriend, while simultaneously praising herself and making it clear that she was available. He was so put off by the whole interaction that he had immediately sought me out. He found her behavior desperate and inappropriate, and he was genuinely concerned about the family dynamic he was witnessing. Of course, when my sister reported the interaction to my parents, she told a completely different story. According to her version, my boyfriend had been the one doing the inappropriate flirting. She had heroically resisted his advances out of loyalty to me, but she felt it was her duty as my sister to inform them about his unacceptable behavior. The moment she told this story, I knew exactly what the outcome would be. My parents didn't even pretend to consider my side or ask for details. They immediately declared that my boyfriend was a bad influence and a disrespectful young man, and I was forbidden from seeing him again. Now, I want to be completely honest about something here. Part of me believed my boyfriend's version not just because I trusted him, but also because, well, let's talk about the elephant in the room. My parents and my sister were all significantly overweight. My parents had always shown love through food, extra treats, bigger portions, constant snacking, and my sister had grown up embracing this lifestyle. I, on the other hand, had always been quite thin. This wasn't by choice initially. When I was being punished, I was often denied snacks and treats, so I simply ate less overall. As I got older, I maintained this naturally slender build. I'm not saying this to be cruel or judgmental about weight, that's absolutely not the point. But the reality is that my sister had never learned to work for anything in her life. She had never had to develop charm, personality, or social skills because my parents gave her everything she wanted just for existing. Add to that the fact that she was frankly not conventionally attractive and had a spoiled, demanding personality, and the idea that my decent-looking, sweet boyfriend would be chasing after her seemed genuinely absurd. But my parents believed her, and that was the end of my first relationship. The same pattern repeated itself with my second boyfriend. Different guy, same story. My sister approached him inappropriately, he rejected her advances, and she immediately ran to my parents claiming he had been hitting on her. My parents decided this pattern proved that I had terrible judgment in men and couldn't be trusted to make good decisions about relationships. After this happened twice, I essentially gave up on serious relationships during high school. It was too painful to introduce someone I cared about into that toxic environment, only to watch my sister destroy it with her lies and manipulation. I ended up developing a reputation for being willing to go to parties and make out with guys, but never committing to anything serious. Some people called me a slut behind my back, but honestly, that was preferable to watching another relationship get sabotaged by my family. Interestingly, during the same time period, my sister did bring home one boyfriend. My parents treated this young man like visiting royalty. They praised everything about him, his manners, his ambition, his family background, his treatment of my sister. I was subjected to constant comparisons. Why can't you find someone like sister's boyfriend? Look how respectful he is compared to those boys you bring around. Your sister knows how to choose quality people. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. And just as quickly, my parents' tune changed completely. Now he was a conniving bastard who had tricked my sister. Apparently, their golden child hadn't made the mistake, she had been deceived by a master manipulator. The cognitive dissonance was stunning, but not surprising. Throughout all of this, the unequal treatment extended to every aspect of our lives. My sister had a significantly larger allowance than I did. Her curfews were hours later than mine. She was free to go wherever she wanted, whenever she wanted, while I needed permission and detailed explanations for every social interaction. When I pointed out these discrepancies, my parents would claim it was because she was older and had earned these privileges through good behavior. But when I reached the same age she had been when she received these freedoms, the goalposts moved. Now it was because I couldn't be trusted like she could, based on my bad judgment in friends and boyfriends, the very same friends and boyfriends she had sabotaged. The summer before my senior year, my sister graduated from high school. Her grades had always been mediocre at best. My parents would throw celebration parties when she managed to get a B in any class, while my consistent A's were dismissed as expected and unremarkable. She was accepted to a college, but it wasn't particularly prestigious, and she hadn't earned any scholarships or academic recognition. Still, my parents made a huge production out of her college acceptance. They promised to pay for everything: tuition, room and board, books, spending money. They talked constantly about how proud they were and how excited they were to support her educational journey. I was thrilled that she would be leaving for college. I thought maybe, finally, with her gone, I might have a chance at a normal senior year. I might be able to rebuild friendships, have a relationship, make some positive memories before I graduated. But even when she was away at college, the torment continued. She came home every other weekend, and somehow, things would always be missing from her room when she left. Or there would be some other manufactured crisis that she blamed on me. My parents would spend the weeks between her visits interrogating me about whatever she had accused me of, and my supposed privileges during her absence would be revoked. Then, about halfway through my senior year, my mother sat me down for a conversation that I knew was coming but had been dreading nonetheless. She explained that since they were paying for my sister's college education, they simply couldn't afford to pay for mine as well. It would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and wait until my sister finished her degree to see if they could financially help me with college. Oh, but if I decided to continue living at home during this waiting period, I would be expected to pay rent, contribute to household bills, and cover all of my own expenses. Essentially, I would be treated like a tenant rather than a daughter. When I mentioned student loans as an option, my mother's response was both condescending and controlling. She said that while yes, I could technically get student loans, they cared too much about my future to let me make such a decision without their guidance. Given my supposedly poor judgment, they would need to evaluate and approve any college I wanted to attend before they would allow me to take on debt for it. I'm still not entirely sure how they plan to legally prevent me from getting student loans as an adult, but I didn't bother asking for clarification. The message was clear. They had no intention of supporting my education in any meaningful way. Here's the thing though, I didn't react the way they expected. I didn't cry, argue, or throw a tantrum. I simply said, okay, I understand your position. Thank you for being honest with me. My mother looked genuinely surprised by my calm response. She kept pushing, making comments that seemed designed to provoke an emotional reaction. Maybe she was hoping I would give her an excuse to make their position seem even more justified. But I refused to give her that satisfaction. My father tried the same approach a few days later, but again, I remained completely composed and accepting of their decision. The truth is, I had seen this coming from miles away. After 18 years of their consistently unfair treatment, I had absolutely no expectation that they would support my education. I had been preparing for this scenario for years. While my sister was out partying and coasting through high school with mediocre grades, I had been studying obsessively. I knew that education was my only ticket out of that toxic household, and I knew I would have to earn it entirely on my own. I had researched scholarships, studied for standardized tests, and maintained perfect grades throughout high school. When the time came, I applied to several colleges and worked incredibly hard on my scholarship applications. And it paid off. I was offered a full scholarship to a decent university for a solid program. It wasn't Harvard or Yale, but it was a legitimate education that would cost me nothing. I knew that if I told my family about this privately, my sister would find a way to sabotage it. So I did something strategic. I announced my scholarship on social media at the exact same time I told my parents. I even made sure to thank them publicly for their support and encouragement, which we all knew was a complete fabrication. By making it public, I ensured that my parents couldn't forbid me from accepting the scholarship without having to explain to our entire extended family why they would prevent their daughter from getting a free college education. Initially, they were even a bit proud and did some bragging about my achievement. But then my sister got to them. I could tell because their attitude shifted dramatically. They started asking if I was sure I wanted to go to college. They mentioned that my sister was struggling academically, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I would probably fail even more spectacularly. I stood my ground. I was 18 years old, I had earned a full scholarship, and I was going to college whether they liked it or not. They weren't happy about it, but there wasn't much they could do to stop me. College was like being released from prison. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who treated me fairly, who judged me based on my actions rather than predetermined biases, who actually seemed to enjoy my company. I started to remember what it felt like to be happy. I maintained contact with my parents and visited during holidays, but since they weren't paying for anything, I had the perfect excuse to limit these visits due to financial constraints. During this time I was very careful not to introduce them to any romantic interests, having learned that lesson far too well. Meanwhile, my sister dropped out of college after about a year and a half. She moved back in with my parents, got a job at the same company where my mother worked, obviously through nepotism rather than merit, and continued to live rent-free while contributing nothing to household expenses. When I pointed out this double standard, my parents claimed it was different but could never adequately explain why. It was during my junior year of college that I met the man who would become my husband. And let me tell you, we could not be more different in terms of personality and temperament. I am, by nature, a people pleaser. I'm the type of person who avoids conflict, who absorbs abuse rather than fighting back, who thinks of perfect comebacks 3 hours after an argument has ended. I'm the person who cries when I'm angry because I can't figure out how to express my frustration effectively. My husband, on the other hand, is the person who actually does all the things the rest of us claim we would do in difficult situations. He doesn't let things slide. He doesn't ignore disrespect. If someone treats him poorly, he addresses it immediately and directly. He loves what he calls drama, but what he really means is that he loves resolving conflicts and holding people accountable for their actions. He's also incredibly strategic. If he doesn't respond to someone's bad behavior right away, it's not because he's letting it go, it's because he's planning something much more comprehensive and devastating. He believes that revenge is a dish best served cold, and he has the patience and creativity to make sure it's perfectly prepared. When we started talking about marriage, we both agreed that we didn't care much about having an elaborate wedding ceremony. We'd much rather spend our money on an amazing honeymoon trip to Europe. As for the location, since his family was scattered across the country and mine was concentrated in my hometown, it made logistical sense to have the wedding there. We sent out engagement announcements and saved the date cards for a wedding that was still several months away. And of course, my parents immediately demanded to meet my fiancé. I was terrified of this meeting, but I felt like I couldn't avoid it entirely. I made my husband promise that I would never leave him alone with my parents or sister, thinking this would prevent the usual pattern of false accusations and manufactured drama. But my husband had other ideas. He was actually excited about meeting them. He had been listening to my stories for years, and he was genuinely looking forward to seeing their behavior firsthand. He even bought a high-quality voice recorder that he could hide in his pocket to document whatever they might say or do. When I told him about my plan to supervise the entire meeting, he looked like I had just canceled Christmas. He wanted to go in alone, armed with his recorder, ready to capture evidence of their awfulness and then use it against them strategically. So he went to meet my parents and sister by himself. And he came back absolutely euphoric. "Babe," he said, practically bouncing with excitement. "You won't believe the awful shit they wanted. There are so many possibilities for how we can completely destroy them." I was confused and wanted to hear the recording immediately, but he wisely insisted that I let him explain the situation first, so I would understand the context properly. Here's what happened. Instead of my sister attempting to flirt with him like she had with my previous boyfriends, my parents and sister had sat him down for what they clearly thought was a reasonable negotiation. After some initial grumbling about not being entirely comfortable with him and questioning my judgment in men, they made their proposition. They were willing to pay for our wedding, but only under one very specific condition. My sister wanted to walk down the aisle first. In a wedding dress. At my wedding. Their justification was that it wasn't fair for a younger sister to get married before an older one, so my sister should at least get to experience the wedding day tradition. She would get to walk down the aisle in a wedding dress, have her moment with all the guests watching, have professional photos taken, and even have her own cake later. My husband said that even with all his preparation and expectation of their awfulness, this request left him completely speechless. He had been ready for flirtation, manipulation, maybe some subtle insults, but this was so far beyond anything he had imagined that his brain basically short-circuited. But then, as he put it, something devilish whispered in his ear, "String them along." Instead of immediately telling them exactly what he thought of their insane proposal, he told them he needed to think about it and discuss it with me. Then he got out of there as quickly as possible before he could give away his true feelings or intentions. When he told me about this conversation, I was completely shocked. The years of distance from my family had made me forget just how truly awful they could be. I had thought there were limits to their favoritism and manipulation, but apparently, there weren't. However, instead of letting me spiral into sadness or anger, my husband immediately started focusing on the revenge possibilities. We spent hours brainstorming increasingly elaborate ways to turn their scheme against them. We came up with some truly outrageous ideas, everything from giving them fake venue information so they would show up to the wrong location, to pretending to go along with their plan and then publicly humiliating them in front of all our guests. When we had narrowed it down to our favorites, we called my husband's brother, who is much more level-headed and practical than we are. We thought he could help us refine our plan and make sure we didn't accidentally do anything illegal. Instead, he essentially told us we were being crazy and that most of our ideas were either impossible to execute or potentially lawsuit-worthy. He wasn't wrong, but it wasn't what we wanted to hear. Eventually, we settled on what seemed like the most straightforward approach. We would pretend to agree to their proposal, but then hire security to prevent my sister from entering the venue on the wedding day. But that was just the beginning. The real genius was in what my husband proposed next. He went back to my parents and told them that he had discussed their proposal with me, and while I wasn't enthusiastic about the idea, he didn't see why it was such a big deal. He said he was willing to help them make it happen because he didn't want to cause family conflict. But then he pointed out a potential problem. I don't like surprises or confrontation, so if I was caught off guard by my sister walking down the aisle first, I might cause a scene in front of all the wedding guests. Marriage is such a big, emotional day that there was no way to predict how I might react. So he proposed a compromise. They would help pay for the wedding. This way, I would feel grateful for their financial contribution and would be less likely to make a fuss when my sister had her moment. Plus, the public nature of the event and my sense of obligation would pressure me to just go along with it. My parents looked surprised by this suggestion, but my sister was apparently so excited that she literally started skipping around the room like a child. They agreed to the plan immediately. But here's the most important part. My husband told them that, based on my history of bad judgment with boyfriends, using their own words against them, I had become very suspicious and controlling in relationships. I supposedly checked his phone regularly and monitored his communications to make sure he wasn't cheating on me. Therefore, he said, it was crucial that nothing about this plan ever be put in writing. No texts, no emails, no social media messages. Any discussions about my sister walking down the aisle would have to happen in person, at their house. And so began months of the most elaborate and satisfying con game I've ever been part of. Rather than pay for our wedding and then lay low, my parents wanted input on every single decision. They wanted to feel like they were planning their precious daughter's dream wedding, even though they thought it would actually be for me. My husband was brilliant in how he handled this. For things that were truly important to us, like the music selection and color scheme, he would convince my parents to let me have my way to keep me compliant and unsuspecting. But for everything else, he had a devious strategy. We would go to, say, a cake tasting or catering consultation. We would sample all the options and then deliberately choose one of the cheapest alternatives. Then my husband would separately bring my sister to the same venue to try everything. He would sigh dramatically and tell her how unfortunate it was that we were trying to be so budget conscious and not take advantage of my parents' generosity. He'd mention how much better the more expensive options were, and how sad it was that we were settling for something inferior. Without fail, my sister would demand that my parents pay for the premium option instead. My parents would then approach us and insist that we shouldn't worry about the cost. They wanted us to have the best, and they would cover the upgrade. We used this strategy for everything: catering, photography, flowers, decorations. Every single aspect of our wedding was upgraded to the most expensive option available, all because my sister wanted to ensure that her wedding day would be as luxurious as possible. The flower situation was particularly amusing. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we actually wanted, then told her sadly that I had insisted on some completely different, much less attractive flowers instead. He made sure she understood that these were my flowers and weren't suitable for someone as special as her. By the next day, my parents were telling us that they had reconsidered the flower selection and really thought we should go with the more expensive, more beautiful option that would photograph better and make everyone happier. The only snag in our plan came with the wedding dress selection. My parents wanted me to wear a hideous dress, well, maybe not objectively hideous, but it definitely wasn't my style and would have been very unflattering on me. We had planned to just agree to their choice and then wear what I wanted anyway, but my mother sent me a text message asking me to confirm that I would wear their selection. Since this would have created written evidence of our deception, we had to handle it differently. I texted back refusing to wear the dress they had chosen, and I stood my ground despite their pressure. My husband went to their house and told them he would see what he could do to change my mind. My sister, always ready with a malicious suggestion, proposed that they should sabotage my preferred dress so I would be forced to wear the one they wanted. My husband pretended to think this was a brilliant idea and agreed to help with the plan. Throughout this entire process, my sister did attempt to flirt with my husband, just like she had with my previous boyfriends. But he handled it perfectly. He acted conflicted and interested just enough to keep her thinking she had a chance, but never actually did anything that could be used against him later. He also made sure to share fake secrets with my parents about our relationship and my supposed personality flaws. He painted me as controlling, jealous, and neurotic, someone who monitored his communications obsessively and flew into rages over small things. This served two purposes. First, it explained why all their wedding-related communications had to be in person rather than in writing. Second, it actually gave me a secret thrill to be portrayed as this dangerous, intimidating woman instead of the pushover I had always been. My husband was having the time of his life with this whole operation. I had never seen someone so genuinely excited about spending their Saturdays driving to their in-laws' house to discuss wedding planning details. He would come home from these visits absolutely glowing with satisfaction at how well the manipulation was working. As the wedding day approached, we finalized the logistics of our revenge. The plan my family had developed was to wait until all the guests were seated and the ceremony was ready to begin. Since brides typically make dramatic entrances after everyone else is in place, they planned to have my sister arrive at that exact moment and walk down the aisle first, in full wedding regalia. The theory was that by the time I found out what had happened, it would be too late to do anything about it without causing a huge scene and ruining the entire event. As for my dress, my husband took some leftover fabric from my dress alterations and brought it to my parents' house as proof that he had sabotaged my original choice. He told them he had to get back to me quickly because I was having a meltdown over the damaged dress and he needed to calm me down. On the actual wedding day, we made sure our security was discreet initially. As guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman with a clipboard checking names against a guest list. It looked like standard wedding venue protocol. But after my parents were seated and settled, we brought out the obvious security, a large, intimidating man who looked exactly like what you'd expect from professional event security. We told him specifically not to allow my sister into the venue under any circumstances, and we promised him a substantial tip if he stuck to the plan without revealing that we had given him those instructions. The timing worked perfectly. My parents received a text from my sister saying she was less than 5 minutes away, so my father went to the front of the ceremony area to signal that things should begin. My bridesmaids, who had been instructed to follow his lead, dutifully processed down the aisle and took their positions. After they were all in place, my father positioned himself at the back of the venue, clearly expecting to walk my sister down the aisle for her moment of glory. Instead, the bridal march began, the doors opened, and I appeared, ready for my actual wedding. The look of shock and confusion on my father's face was absolutely priceless. He kept glancing behind me, clearly trying to figure out what had happened to my sister and why I was there instead. Then his phone rang. I could see from where I was standing that it was my sister calling. Without a word of explanation or apology, he abandoned me at the back of the venue and answered the phone. There were gasps and murmurs of confusion from our guests. Everyone could see that something was very wrong, but nobody understood what was happening. My husband's friend, who was in on our plan, loudly asked, "What's going on?" I responded in a tearful voice, and yes, some of those tears were real, that my father had told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. That wasn't exactly what he had said, but my husband and I had agreed that if anything went wrong with the original plan, I should make my father look as bad as possible. The tears weren't entirely acting, either. Despite everything I knew about my family, some part of me had held on to a tiny hope that they wouldn't actually go through with something so cruel and selfish. My husband's friend then loudly exclaimed, "What did he mean it shouldn't be you?" making sure that as many guests as possible could hear the question. Then she announced that she was going to investigate and ran toward the venue entrance. We had planned this specifically to create chaos and confusion while also preventing my parents from returning and potentially disrupting the actual ceremony. At some point, my mother also left to see what was happening. My father-in-law, who had been warned that he might need to step in, quickly came to my side and took my arm. The sight of him rushing to rescue me from my abandonment helped me compose myself and even smile a little. I walked down the aisle to whispers and murmurs as guests tried to piece together what they had witnessed. Some people even left during the ceremony to investigate the drama, though they returned later. When I reached my husband at the altar, he was beaming. He made a joke about my Oscar-worthy performance and assured me that he was going to make my family pay dearly for what they had just put me through. We completed our wedding ceremony without any further interruption. My parents never returned. Throughout the reception, I noticed guests periodically leaving and coming back, clearly getting updates on whatever drama was unfolding outside, but everyone was kind enough not to burden me with the details during my celebration. At one point, someone whispered an update to my husband, and he stepped outside briefly. When he came back, he looked like he was struggling not to break character and start laughing with joy. Here's what was happening outside while we were getting married. My sister had indeed arrived in a full wedding dress, expecting to have her moment of glory. The security guard refused.